Hi and welcome back to the channel. And what do we have for you today? Well, it's a pretty chunky video and it's the second part in a series that I've produced on the Apple IIe card for the LC series of Macintoshes. In the first episode, we went through how you could take one of these cards and plug it into an LC, which it is specifically designed for, and the LC is actually adapted to work with that card as well. And it allows you to have a fully working, pretty much, Apple IIe inside an LC475. This was a solution that Apple made back in the 1990s, early 90s, as a way of weaning people off physical Apple II computers and getting them to use Macintoshes in their education labs in classrooms across, well, mainly America, to be honest, because that's where it was a massive hit in terms of education. Now today, it's become a little bit of a grail card, and it also has this Y cable, which allows you to plug in disk drives to it, and also a joystick, and that has become, along the way, generally separated from the card, and therefore is quite difficult to get. I was very lucky, as we have a channel member who donated the card with the cable to the channel, so thank you very much to Brian Roy for that. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to go through how we actually use the card with different media. The Macintosh LC475 has a blue SCSI in it, and it has a number of hard disks on it. And those hard disks can actually then be used as hard disks with the Apple II as well. So we'll be showing you how to do that in this video. I'll be showing you how to use a Floppy Emu, which is a fantastic device which is available for Macintoshes, Apple IIs. I think it also works with the Apple III. Works with basically a number of Apple legacy devices to emulate floppy drives. Now, obviously for a Macintosh, you may be more interested in hard drives generally because it's of the era where those machines had hard drives. But even on these machines, floppies were still an important part of the process and use of these machines. So that's why a Floppy Emu is pretty much a must-have device to go with your legacy Apple kit. So we'll be looking at how we actually use 3.5-inch images on here to copy onto a 3.5-inch drive built into the machine here. You could also, I assume, use a legacy 3.5-inch drive, a drive that was designed mainly for the Apple II. And you could do the same. I don't actually have one of those, so I can't really show you that in this video. But what I do have is a compatible 5.25-inch drive. And that's actually much more interesting because most of the software that came with the Apple II came on 5.25-inch drives. So it's actually a lot more suitable to actually take images, which are, 5.25-inch games, and then write those onto 5.25-inch discs. So I'll be showing you how you do that in this video as well. And that actually involves a really sneaky little trick that I worked out how to do. So yeah, we'll be having a look at that, how that works as well. And it's actually quite cool. Even if you have an Apple IIe card, you may not know that trick. So yeah, watch on. It's towards the end of the video where you can find out how to do that. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff to go through in this video. So I think we should crack on. Oh, actually, there is one last thing I want to say before we move on and start with our first chapter. If you're not a member of the channel, please think about joining the channel. It really helps us bring in some funds to pay for equipment. For instance, I would really love to have a second camera for when I'm doing repair videos. Right now, I only have the one camera, which is the one I'm using here. What that means is I can only really film what I'm doing. I can't film myself, and it's nice if I was able to talk to you. But right now, unfortunately, that's out of my budget. Joining the channel does get you some benefits. You get these videos with no adverts, no sponsor segment whatsoever, and you also get them a little bit early as well. Obviously, any funds that we can bring in to help the channel would be welcome. Brian Roy has also helped us by donating some equipment. You could do that as well. But really, month to month, what helps the channel go is being a channel member. So please, if you could, join the channel. Anyway, that being said, let's move on and yeah, let's get going like I said. But before we do that, let's have a quick word from our sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay, where you can make your tech dreams a reality. And right now, PCBWay is celebrating 11 years of excellence. Just makes me wonder how many people have actually made things with PCBWay over that time. I've put in orders and I've seen many other people in the community put in orders too. Anyway, I'm just glad they're around. And if you go to their website right now and click on enter, you can get some coupons which will actually give you discounts on your future orders. So why not head over to PCBWay? Because whether it's PCB prototyping, PCB assembly, 3D printing, or even CNC machining, PCBWay is the way. Starting with an instant quote for your PCB projects, PCBWay will leap into action, building your PCB, assembling it for you if you wish, and once it's passed their quality tests, it'll be winging its way to you in a flash. PCBWay, PCB prototyping the easy way. Okay, so what we're going to do next is we're going to look at how we actually get data loaded into our Apple IIe. And it's actually surprisingly simple and complicated at the same time, because I've got to say some of the things that happened with the Apple IIe over time as it evolved, it can be a little bit confusing. So hopefully I don't get mixed up in this section. So yeah, bear with me. So first of all, we have this device here, a 3.5-inch drive built into the LC475. And it's an ideal scenario for myself because this machine is part of the LC lineage, which was basically where the card was intended to be used in. This particular drive is compatible with my IIe card, and I can put disks in there, and it treats it as if it was a Unidisc floppy drive. So the Unidisc drive looked like this. Let me show it to you. Rather charming drive, 3.5-inch floppy drive with an eject button there, and on the back it has a 25-pin D-sub connector. Now I say it looked like this because this isn't actually a Unidisc drive, which is confusing. This is actually another drive, and I've made a note here of the serial number. It's an A9M0106, and it says on here for an Apple II computer with a SuperDrive controller in it, or for an Apple IIgs, or you can use it with a Macintosh. I'm actually using this with my 2GS. So yeah, that's what the Unidrive looks like. But like I said, that actually wasn't a Unidrive. Yeah, like I said, some of the things that Apple did were a little bit confusing. So the drive which is built into here is emulated as if it actually was a Unidisc floppy disks, which means you can use 800K 3.5-inch floppy disks, which you can see that I've got a couple in the background. And I've actually got some software on that particular disk there, Copy 2 Plus, yeah, which is a copy utility, which was very well regarded in the Apple II community as far as I'm aware. So that's the first option, and that's the easiest option. If you get one of these cards and you have an LC, you'll have that drive, so you can use that. Now, the only problem with that is most of the software on the Apple IIe didn't come on 800K 3.5-inch floppy disks. I mean, once you get to the Apple IIc era, which is I think what, 984, something like that, then you would have started to see it. But you know, the vast majority of software by that time would have been released on 5.25-inch floppies, and companies would have tended to want to carry on doing that because obviously that's where the really large user base was. So yeah, even today, when you look back, you find most of the software is actually available on 5.25-inch disks. You can see I've got a copy there of Witness by Infocom. I'll take my finger away so you can actually see it. And that actually comes on a 5.25-inch disc, and it does work. So we'll have a look at loading that in a while. And to do that, we need another drive. So by complete chance, when I was going through my Apple II phase, buying a lot of Apple II equipment during you know what, I bought this drive. So let's have a look at what the serial is on this. It's an A9M0107, and it is very charmingly called a 5.25-inch drive. Actually says there, Apple 5.25-inch drive. Completely generically named, because you could argue that the Disk 2 drives, which come with the original Apple II, were also 5.25-inch drives. But anyway, that's the official name. So it's better to actually use the serial number if you want to buy these, because you need to get this one specifically. You'll see that it also has the 25-pin D-sub connector on the back. And that means obviously you can then plug it into the Y cable. So let's do that now. So I'm just going to plug it in here. And I've made sure that the Y connector is actually screwed into the back of the card. And that's because it's actually really quite heavy. The cable's quite heavy. And obviously when you connect things to it, it's even heavier, and it would have a tendency to fall out otherwise. So the connector itself is actually quite snug. So that is now ready to use. So now we have, in theory, an Apple IIe with a 800K 3.5-inch drive there. And we also have a 5.25-inch drive here. So let's actually have a look at how these actually work in progress. I'll boot up the machine And let's have a look at that next. Okay, we booted up. So let's open up the option panel. I'll hold down option while I open up, start up the Apple IIe. Because I'm just going to show you something that's quite important to understand about this, the way this works. So right now, the way it works is that this disk is effectively, as I understand it, plugged into slot 6. At the same time, this drive here is connected here using slot 5, which has been emulated as a smart port. So the way it actually boots up is it goes from slots 7 to slot 6 to slot 5 and over to the left to boot up. So you can see that, as I said, this particular drive is plugged into slot 6. And you can see there, it's showing the 5¼ inch drive there is plugged into slot 6. This drive is plugged into slot 5, so it will be the second disk that it will look at to try and boot. So if you have any disk plugged in here, it's going to try and boot this first and this second. So let's try that next. I'm going to take a witness. Let's open this up. There we are. We'll pop the disk in. And here is my copy of Copy 2 Plus. We'll go into how I made this later. It's a complicated little process, so it's definitely worth showing in this video how you can do that. It took me a few days to realize how to do it, so yeah, I want to share that with you. So plug that in, and I think we're ready to go. And what we'll do is we'll just continue and let it try and boot up. So it's going to go into the Apple IIe. There we are. You can hear it's hammering the heads there. And it's asking me whether I want to use 80 columns, which is basically Infocom asking me if I want to use the 80 column facility on this particular Apple II, because that will give me smaller text, which makes the game easier to use. So I'm going to say yes, thank you very much. And it will now boot up into Witness. It doesn't take very long, actually. It's a much faster floppy drive than the 1541 on the Commodore 64. There we are, look at that. It's amazing. It's really, really fast. And as I said, it's really nice because it's got 80 column mode. Remember I said that I'm using a VGA adapter. It's not doing a wonderful job of it, to be honest. So on a real monitor, this would actually look better than it looks here. It would look absolutely mint. So yeah, just bear that in mind. So there we go. 2 disks in the drive, an 800K disk here and a 5¼ inch disk here. And as you can see, it booted up into this one first because of that priority that you have in the slot list. So what we'll do now is we'll take the disk out. And something you can do actually to reset the machine without having to go back to the control panel is Control, Option, and the reset button here. If you press that, it will reset the Apple IIe instantly and use whatever configuration you have. So you have to be careful about that. If you haven't saved any data, you could lose data. So yeah, just bear that in mind. So I'm going to hold this down, press this button. Again, it's hammering the heads, trying to find a disk. It won't find one. So what it should do now is it's gone onto this disk and it is actually booting off it, and it's loaded up Copy 2 Plus. Now, interestingly, it's loaded up the wrong file. And I'm not sure why in this particular copy of Copy 2 Plus it does this. Maybe I've copied it incorrectly and I should have done something different. But it leads on to something else, which I'm going to show you. And it's a really cool side of this whole system, actually. You can also load software directly from the Apple Macintosh side of things. So let's do that. So I'm going to hold down Control, Apple, and Escape. And it's going to take us back to here. Okay, there we are. We're back in the Mac side of things. Over here, you can actually see the disk on the desktop. Classic old Mac stuff. If you want to get it out of the machine, you drop it onto the wastebasket and it will eject it. So there we are, out it pops. And we'll just push it back in again, because I actually want to do something with the disk. There we are. So because we have the ProDOS file system installed in the system directory for this Macintosh, we can actually read ProDOS disks as if they were pretty much native Macintosh disks. So what I can do is just double click on it and it'll open it up. And there are the files inside. If you wanted to load, for instance, this. Now this is actually the main menu that I want to use from Copy 2 Plus. But in fact, it's actually loading one of these. I'm not really sure which one it is. It's meant to, as far as I understand it with ProDOS, load up things alphabetically. So I would expect this to be the first file that it goes to, because it starts with a B, as you can see. and I would expect this to be the last one. I have tried renaming this file, but for some reason that didn't seem to work, which is a bit strange, but anyway. But I can actually load this directly just by double-clicking on it. So let's just try that. So it's now going to open up the file, go into Apple IIe mode, and it will actually boot up that file. And you will see that we'll end up with a different user interface to what we saw originally. So give that a second to boot up. There we go. So this is a fantastic feature, yeah? You can click on anything on the desktop, any disk, floppy disk I should say, or smart port disk, and you can navigate to a file, click on it and load it up. So let's just go back onto the desktop. We'll quit out of the IIe. Yep, let's quit. Now, this feature does have a limitation, and I'm just going to show that to you. You'll see on the right-hand side here that we have a number of smart port disks. These are the ones with Apple II on it. And then up here, we've got an Apple II floppy disk. So these are the two different icons for these things. You can see that it's a little icon of what looks like a hard drive. You can see a little activity light there. And it's got Apple II on top. So yeah, this is meant to be an Apple II hard drive, or in other words, a smart port file. So these are all 32 megabytes in size. We'll be having a look at how I actually made these a little bit further on in the video, so keep watching to see how I do that. If we open up one of these, like for instance this 2EE, I've actually made them alphabetical to tell them apart. You can see here we've got the files again, and launch a system would be the file that would actually start it. So we could double click on that, and that would actually load up that piece of software. We know we can do the same with the floppy disk. Now, the limitation that I'm talking about is, if I were to put, for instance, let's say Witness back in the 5¼ inch drive, let's do that. Keep an eye on the desktop, pop it in, close the door, and you'll see that no disk appears on the desktop. And the reason for that is the 5¼ inch drive, don't forget, comes from an earlier era where it doesn't actually have a detector to tell it that a disk has been put in. That was a feature that came along with Macintoshes. Macintoshes have relatively advanced disk drives, actually. They were quite fancy for the time, I remember, in that they would detect if you had a disk in the drive. But what's also quite nice about the Macintosh drives as well is you have auto eject, which is pretty cool. In other words, if I were to drop this disk onto the wastebasket, it will actually pop it out. So this disk is much more sophisticated. It detects when I put the disk in, it detects obviously when you take it out because you have to eject it manually using that system. But for a 5¼ inch disk, you don't have that. If I take the disk out, it can't tell that it's out. If I put it in, it can't tell that it's in. And because of that, it can't show it on the desktop. And it's that reason that you get the rattle. That's the heads going to track 0, and it will go to track 0 and try and read some data when you boot up the machine. And it's at that point that it knows that the disk is there because it checks for it. And it only happens at boot time. So that's basically the limitation of that. You can obviously click on these files on floppy disks, and you can click on them on hard disks as well, but you can't do it with 5¼ inch disks. These have that limitation. So let's just show you that again. So yeah, copy to plus. And as I said, you can just click on util.system and it will load up back to the menu that we just saw. So this is a utility we're going to look at later because it's actually the way that I made this disk, which is Oregon Trail. Obviously it's not the original, I'd made it myself. I downloaded an image of this and then I got it onto this machine. We'll show this process later, and then I actually managed to write this out. So if I stick this in here, I'll show you it working. And all we have to do now to boot that is obviously just reset the machine, and it'll boot this first because it's got the priority. So let's just reset the machine. As you can see, heads hammer, finds the disk, starts booting, and straight away we're into Oregon Trail. So you can see that it's actually quite flexible. And what we're going to do next actually is we're going to look at this, which is a Floppy Emu. This is an emulated disk drive, and also a smart port device. And now smart port was a bit of a sort of catch-all I/O system, because not only did it allow you to connect the Unidisc drive, do you remember we mentioned that? The drive that this is emulating, the 3.5 inch drive, but it would also allow you to connect up basically hard drives as well. Think of it as a kind of SCSI controller. So yeah, we're going to have a look at this next. Let's recap. We can connect up a 5.25 inch drive. In fact, we can have two of them because you can actually daisy chain them together. You can also, I believe, plug in a Unidisc, so another 3.5 inch 800K. And again, you can actually daisy chain those together. I believe, if you wish, you can also mix. So you can have a 5¼ inch drive and you can have a uniport drive using the daisy chaining, because on the back of here, there's actually a port which allows you to plug in another drive. And that's what we're going to do eventually with this. This will give us more flexibility because we'll actually be able to write out our own Apple discs, which is quite cool, either 800K discs or 5¼ if you can get this set up. So yeah, let's have a look at that next. So this is the Floppy Emu, and it has several modes. It's a very versatile device designed to work with the Apple II and the Macintosh, and it implements floppy drives mainly, but it also implements hard drives for the Apple II, which are called SmartPort devices. They are 32 megabytes in size, which may seem very small by today's standards, but you've got to remember that a typical piece of software would have been less than 140K. Discs for the Apple II started off, I think, as 108, 116K, and then they went up to 140 a little bit later when the disk format was revised to make it more efficient. So this device can actually change between modes, and I'll show you how you do that. There's one thing I should say, actually, is there's a problem with my device. This button, I think, got crushed at some point. It was in storage for a while before I actually had the cabin built. And because of that, it can be a bit flaky. And what happens is it will stay pressed sometimes. So if you see me struggling at some points, bear in mind that's actually going on, is that it's not giving up when I press on it. So you'll see me fiddling around a bit. Okay, so let's change. So to do that, we need to reboot the device. This is the power button, which also resets it. It doesn't really have a power button. You can't switch it off, but you can reset it. So let's just reset it. And when it comes up, I'm going to click on that. Now you can choose the modes that you want to use. So right now you see I've got it set on Apple II 5¼ inch floppy. That does actually work with this card. Then above it, and this is very misleading, you've got the Apple II 3.5 inch floppy, which would be an 800K floppy, I believe. That doesn't work. You may think it will, but it doesn't. What you actually need for 800K discs is down the bottom there, which is the uni disc. I believe that was introduced, I think it was for the Apple IIc. I think it also works for the Apple II as well, but I think you need a special adapter card for that. I think it's the Lion card. Anyway, Apple II guys will let me know if I've got that wrong. Above it, you've got SmartPort Unit 2. That's actually only for the 2GS. And then above that, you've got SmartPort. So let's select that. And it'll tell you that it's had the mode set, and now you need to restart your computer to get that mode to start. You don't need to start the computer again, you just need to reset the device. So just reset the device, wait for a second, it should do a self-test, and it should say that it's in SmartPort mode. And in a second, it will actually show you the SmartPort devices. So these are actually images on the SD card, which is plugged in here. Some of these came with the device and I've not changed them. The top one is actually called Action Replay. It's a collection of games for the Apple II. You don't have to select that. The way it works with the Apple IIe card actually is that it will only boot up the first SmartPort device. So if you want to change these, unfortunately, you do have to put it into a Mac or a PC and rename those images so that, for instance, the roleplay one is SmartPort 0, and then rename, say, Action to be SmartPort 1, swap those around. There's no way of actually doing it in the UI, which is a little bit unfortunate, but that's the way it is. So if we were to activate this and go into the software, we could actually boot up off that Action Replay image there. So let's change device again. So to do that, I'm going to reset it. And then when it boots up, I'm going to click on there. And I'm going to change it now to 5¼ inch drives. Select that, again, reset, wait for it to restart. Okay, once it's done, you've got a choice of discs. Now, some of these discs work with different software. As you can see, you've got discs for Lisa, Macintosh discs, and Apple II discs. And if we go into the Apple II discs, you'll see we've got two choices. We can go for 3.5 inch discs, or we can go for 5¼ inch discs here. Like I said, if you want to use the 3.5 inch discs, you've got to use the uni disc drive. So yeah, bear that in mind. Let's go down here to 5.5 inch discs. A bunch of different stuff that comes with the Floppy Emu. I'm going to go down to games, action games it says, but in fact there's a different bunch of games in there. I've got Ultima in there and Ultima 3, but they're actually quite tricky because they're multi-game discs. I've got the first disc here of Task Times in Town Town, which was a really cool adventure that came out on the Apple II, I think first, maybe, could be. And then later on the C64, really enjoyed this game. And I believe the Task Times A image works. So let's select that. There we go. And it's ready to go. So let's open up the 2E and it should hopefully boot into this. Yeah, 2E's booting. When it starts, what you should see happen is, there you go, you can see the activity light flashing, and you can see also the tracks changing. And in a second, it will actually load up Task Times. There we go. It's yeah, it's a fun game. It's sort of set in an alternate universe where you have these odd instruments and things like that. Yeah, it's a cool game. I've actually got my eye on a copy of it. So hopefully I'll be able to get that in my collection soon and replay it, because I really enjoyed playing this back on my Commodore 64 back in the day. I'm not sure what it's like on the Apple II, but like I said, I believe it's actually the original system. I'll have to do some research into it and find out where it was actually developed first. But there we go. That's basically the Floppy Emu. Like I said, you can boot up 5¼ inch discs. You can boot up 3½ inch discs if you want to, but you've got to make sure that you use the Unidisc drive, not the 3½ inch drive at the top, which you would kind of think it would be, but it isn't. And obviously you can use SmartPort, which then gives you access to effectively hard disks. But like I said, the only deficiency I would say with the UI is that there's no way of changing between those SmartPort devices, which means you're kind of limited really to one. Whereas in fact with the Apple II card, you've got a lot more flexibility. So that's an interesting thing that, yeah, the Apple IIe card does actually allow you that. Anyway, yeah, the Floppy Emu device, very, very useful if you've got one of these cards. So what we're going to do next is we're going to make a couple of hard drives. It's a little bit of an arcane process. The manual that actually comes with the 2E card does explain it. So yeah, if you can download the manual, you're good to go. But I'm just going to go through it here so you can see what's involved. Once we've made those hard drives, we can then put data onto them. And there's a couple of different ways we can do it. If you actually own a Floppy Emu, you can plug that in, get that set up as part of the system, put a hard disk image onto it and then copy it across onto the prepared images. Alternatively, you can actually transfer data on your PC. So there's a couple of different ways to do it, and I'm going to show both of them because at the end of the day, you may not have a Floppy Emu. So the first thing that we need to do is open up the boot drive, and over here, I've actually got a folder set up and repair. So what you actually want is the HDSE setup patched. So I'm just going to load that. And you can see that it's automatically set itself up to work with SCSI device 1. That's actually the boot device, so we don't want to fiddle around with that. In fact, it's ID number 4. And what I've done is I've basically blanked it so that we can do this. It's actually on the desktop there, see disk 4. And the hard drives that are associated with that early in the video, they're gone. I've blanked those so we can go through the process. So let's change to device number 4. There we are. We're going to partition it. And we want to do a custom partition. And you can see it's already basically put two things onto the drive. It's put a Mac driver, which takes up 16K of the space, and the rest of the space has been used to create a partition, which is the full space basically, and it's called disk 4. So we're going to remove that to give ourselves room. Do you want to destroy the data? Yes, we do. We know there's nothing on there. Just say OK. Next, we want to click in this area to create a new partition. And I'm going to say ProDOS volume, and I'm going to use the maximum amount of space. You can see here it's already actually correct. So yeah, that's 32 megabytes. So OK that. It's going to ask for a name. So I'm going to go for 2EE in caps to show it's the E drive. OK that. There we are. It's made that. We're going to do that again. Click again. And again, ProDOS volume. And you can see now it's actually not using the full space that I could use. So 32767 and OK that. And again, we're going to call it 2E and this time F. And that's basically it. That's the total number of ProDOS volumes that I've been able to put on one drive at least. So the way I've got around that is I've actually got multiple SCSI IDs. Each one of them is between 512 megabytes and a gigabyte of hard drive space. If you have a bigger amount of space, you could actually have more IDs. The rest of the space isn't currently used, which will be a waste because we can't use that to store anything for the Macintosh side of things. So let's just click on that. And what I want to do is make sure that I type in 958482, so I use up the total amount of space which is left over. Let's click on that. And oh yeah, we actually need to choose what it is. So Macintosh volume, let's type that in again because unfortunately blanked it. There we go. Okay, that. And there we are, it's done it. If you've done this for the first time, it wouldn't actually have that name, disk4, it would be called untitled. And unfortunately in this software, you don't have an ability to rename it, even though you could rename the ProDOS partitions. Not sure why that is. Mac aficionados might know why. So it can be difficult if you do this as a batch to work out which disk is which. So it might be an idea to do one drive at a time, partition it, name the disk, so you can actually work out, which particular drive maps which particular SCSI ID, because that's generally the way you identify things between different machines. So let's click on done and quit. Just shut these down. And now if we open up 2E, there we are, it's blank. And we've got F, where's F? There we are, F's just underneath. And then you've got disk 4, where's that? That's down here. And that's blank as well, nothing in it. And you can see it's basically a gigabyte, just a bit less than a gigabyte. So they're ready to have data put on them. They're completely empty. So what we're going to do next is we're going to move over to my PC and I'm going to show you how you use a piece of software called Cider 2 to transfer data onto those hard drives. It's a pretty easy process actually, but there's a couple of gotchas which I should show you so that you don't fall foul of the same pitfalls that I did. So yeah, let's do that now. Okay, so let's shut down the Mac. And I'm doing that because then I can take out the SD card, the micro SD card I should say. Take that out. We're going to pop this in the PC over here. And yeah, let's get those hard drive images created. Let's pop this in here. So the tool I'm going to use to do this is called Cider 2. I actually did some research, of course, when I was making this video, and I heard about Cider. It's a utility which you could only get on Windows. That's why we've moved over to my Windows PC. I did actually use it in the early stages of this video to make these images, but I discovered that there is actually a Cider 2, and I must admit, it's a massive improvement over the original Cider. Cider, as far as I could see, would only open up ProDOS images in a flat view. It did display the structure, but it didn't make it easy to interact with that structure. And what do I mean by that? Well, it was quite difficult to copy files from one image to another and maintain the structure, the folders, and yeah, that became quite onerous. You had to literally hand copy files and sets of files from one folder to another, making sure that you maintained the structure. Cider 2 doesn't seem to have that issue, which is really good. What we're going to do on the left is we're going to open up an image. So we're going to say File, Open. And I'm going to go to my Apple folder. This is where I have my Apple II stuff, Apple IIe software. And I'm going to load up Total Replay. That's the first Total Replay. You can see here 32 megabytes in size, which is the same size as the hard disk that we just made. It's going to load up all the files. And what's really nice about it, like I said, is it does actually show you the correct hierarchy inside the actual image. So for instance, there is an X folder. If you double click on that, you'll see that it's actually full of files. So yeah, in Cider 1, they would all be shown at the same level, but with a prefix just to show that it was actually in a folder. Yeah, luckily we don't have that problem here. So I can click up arrow to go back up to the same level. So the next thing we need to do is open up the image for the hard drive. So I'm going to click on Open again, and I'm going to go to LC475. For some reason, it doesn't list HDA files, which is what a blue SCSI expects an image to be. It's got known formats here, and it's got a lot of them, but it doesn't include HDA. So you just need to say all files so you can see the files. And you can see, like I said, there's the boot disk, and these are previous images that I've made. And the SCSI ID that we were just interacting with, SCSI ID 4, is there. And you can see it's 1 gigabyte in size. And that actually contains Mac hard drive and 2 Apple II hard disks, as we just saw, we just created. So let's just click on that and open it up. And there we are. So on the left-hand side, you can see it showing you the structure of the actual drive. You can see it's got Apple, Macintosh, and then here it's got ProDOS. And inside ProDOS, you've got ProDOS E, as you saw. That's the E drive and that's the F drive that we just made. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this into this drive. And it's just as simple as you can either drag and drop or you can copy and paste. So I'm just going to do, let's just do drag and drop and drag it across. There we are, starts to copy the data. Very, very quick. Yeah, much faster than doing it on an actual Apple II running at Apple II speeds. So it's definitely the way I would do it if you're going to interact with hard drive images, because they're pretty massive for an Apple II. So there we are, that's that done. Drive F is currently empty. So tell you what, let's do the other total. It's not called total replay, it's called instant replay. So let's open that up. And we're going to go to Apple again, our software folder, and instant replay. Yeah, open that up. There we are. And the same thing again, we're just going to shift select everything and drag it across. And it's as simple as that. You can actually do that with normal floppy images as well. So a normal floppy image would be a DSK image. So let me try and show you that. I won't actually copy the data across, but I'll just show you the image. So if you go to File, Open, and yeah, in here we've got some disk images. Not all disk images are actually openable. I don't know if a Cider Press 2 has made that any better. I'm assuming that the reason why you can't open certain disk images is because they're copy protected. They're not ProDOS. So let's try opening Donkey Kong. Let's try that. Yeah, there you go. You see, it doesn't recognize it as a valid image. Let's try another one. And this was something that I struggled with. So later in this video, we're going to look at another technique for copying data across. And that's going to be using the Floppy Emu, which can read all image types. So if you have an issue of copying across data using Cider Press 2, you can obviously then go and use the Floppy Emu to do it as well, if you obviously have one. What about BattleTech boot? Let's try that. Yeah, there we are. So what you could actually do is then copy that into a subfolder over here. You can make a folder over here. I'm sure you can make folders. Does it have that here? Create directory, there you go. So you can create a directory and then you could drop that into there, BattleTech, and then on your Apple IIe, using a piece of software, you could copy the files from that folder into the root of a floppy disk and actually make a floppy disk that way, which is a little bit manual, but it is a valid way of actually doing things with ProDOS, because ProDOS is a full-on DOS system. There's no copy protection, and you can, you know, copy and manipulate files just as freely as you would on a Windows or Macintosh machine these days. So there we go. That's pretty simple. So now let's move over back to the Apple II and let's see if we can get these to boot up. Okay, let's put this in and boot up the machine. Okay, let's go into the software and we'll make sure that we've got the IIe image set up. Actually, let me just open it up to show you that. There we are. There's the data that we just applied to it on the PC. So that worked fine. And yeah, let's just open this with Option and just make sure that it's actually set up to boot. There we are. Yeah, good. Okay, so E is ready to boot from. So let's restart and it should hopefully boot up that image. And it can't. And I knew it wouldn't be able to do that because I've actually hit this problem before. There's a weird thing about those images. So let me just show you. So we need to quit out of here. So if we look up inside here, you'll see there isn't actually a ProDOS file. And the way ProDOS works is there are basically always at least two files on each disk. There's the ProDOS file, which actually contains ProDOS, and then there is usually a system file. In this case, it's called launcher system. You can have other system files that will, for instance, boot up into BASIC. That's quite a common setup. So if we actually are looking at a boot drive here with our Apple IIe software, you'll see you've got that pair of files. Now, we are missing ProDOS, which is wrong. And I don't understand why, but these images, they just don't have ProDOS on them, which is odd because I wouldn't expect them to boot. And I'm not sure they always have to have ProDOS, but it looks like they do, so because they don't boot, right? So anyway, so if we'll put ProDOS on, and if we had a blank disk and we just wanted to boot up into BASIC, we would also put BASIC system on as well. But as you can see right now, we have launcher system, which is a valid system file. So that's perfectly fine. That should now boot. So let's give that a go. And let me just show you F actually. And again, the same thing, no ProDOS. So let's just put ProDOS on there as well, because it's definitely missing. There we go. And let's just boot up. Now it should obviously be already set up. So let's just boot, see what happens. There we are, ProDOS, Total Replay. And there is the collection of games which you get with Total Replay. So just to show you that isn't a fluke, let's now load up Instant Replay, the second collection. So go back into the menu, Smart Port, and we'll just move this over here. We'll put F here and we'll restart. ProDOS, Instant Replay 2, Total Replay 2, aka Instant Replay. So there you go. It's odd that those images have ProDOS missing, and I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe somebody out there who understands more about Macs would explain that to me. But yeah, it's a little bit of a mystery. But there we are. That's how, we can create images, hard drives, I should say. They are actually images. I call them images all the time because they're actually images on the SD card. And then we can actually copy data across onto them and then have that then boot up automatically when we start up the Apple II. So you've got a really cool way there of actually copying data across. It's one of the options that you can use. The other option, like I said, is Floppy Emu. What I'm actually going to do next is just show you one extra thing, which is to do with the order of files on the drive. Do you remember I tried to boot into Copy 2 Plus earlier and it didn't work? I was coming up with a weird menu. I actually created that disk by using Cider Press, actually. It wasn't Cider Press 2. And so I basically built it by hand. And because of that, the order of the files was slightly wrong. But there is a way of actually changing that after the fact. So I'm going to show you how I actually fixed that disk so now that it actually does boot up into the right menu. So yeah, let me just show you that next. Okay, let's just boot up into Copy 2 Plus and we'll just recap on what the problem is before we actually fix it. Actually with Copy 2 Plus, ironically. So let's pop that in the drive and just make sure we got our drive set up correctly. So we'll open up the menu, we'll open up the options. There we go. And just make sure that we have the drive. We do not. Let's just take these out, the smart ports. We don't need these. Okay, so let's just restart and it'll boot up off this disk because we don't have a disk in the 5 1/4 inch. Give it a second. There we are, it's booting off that. It'll say ProDOS. And in a few seconds, it'll boot up to the wrong piece of software. So there is a reason why this is happening. And I found this out earlier today, very, very happy to find out that this was actually an issue. I'd been told previously that the system files on a disk searched in alphabetical order. Well, it doesn't actually seem to be the case. They are given an order, a number that they actually are loaded in. And if obviously the wrong file is given the higher priority, it will actually boot first. And that's actually what's going on here. So we can fix that by actually using Copy 2 Plus. So to do that, we need to actually boot into the right menu. So we're going to use the booting from the disk and choosing the actual icon technique. So let's just quit out of this. There we are. We'll open up the floppy disk, find the util file. There it is, util system. And now we're going to boot off this by double clicking on it, and that will load it up correctly. And there we go, it's booting up to the right menu. So the tool we want to use is Sort Catalog. I actually played around with the software a couple of days ago, and I thought Sort Catalog was just for alphabetical sorting, just for reading purposes. But then it turns out it's not. It's actually to assign the orders to files. So we're going to go on slot 5 drive 1, which is actually this disk. And there is the order. And you can see that BC3 system is the first file on the disk. These are actually listed in order. So what we need to do is we need to use the arrow keys to find util.system, and you can imagine where it is. There we are. It's basically it's the last file on the disk, and that's exactly what we were seeing in the Mac windowing system. So what we need to do now is press Enter, and that will assign it as the first a file on the disk, and I'm just going to go up the files and actually press enter on each one in turn. And this will now basically reverse the order of the disk. I don't think the order particularly matters as long as that file is the first one. It should now basically boot off that. And what we need to do now to assign that to the disk is press G for go. There we are. And now it should be ready to go. But before we do that, let's just catalog the disk. Actually, it's not that. To catalog the disk, which is T, and then N, yeah, that drive. There we are. It's showing util system as being the first file on the disk. So I actually thought originally that the file order was just basically alphabetical or just some kind of random order. It's not. It's actually fixed by assigning priorities to each different file in the file structure. I'm not quite sure why they decided on that approach, but I guess it does give you an explicit control. And yeah, I suppose at some point it was decided that it was a good way to do things. So if we press Control Apple back, we should reset. It's now going to boot off this in a second. There it goes. And it should now boot into that menu. There you go. That's how you get past that problem. Fantastic. Anyway, on to the next thing, which is basically setting up Floppy Emu so that we can then copy disks from virtual disks on here into real disks here, or indeed on here, which is the last part of the puzzle, I think, in terms of working with media. So let's do that next. So for me, actually, it's been a few weeks since the last section. And the reason for that was I ordered some equipment that I wanted to use to make this video complete. Obviously, I had to wait for that to turn up. And then on top of that, other things interjected, and I had to work on some other things. So yeah, it's actually been quite a long time. I think about 2 or 3 weeks since I recorded the last section. But what we're going to do next is we're going to try and use the Floppy Emu to use emulated disks with real disks. And in some cases, that's actually very easy to do. And in other cases, it's weirdly difficult. And that's to do with daisy chaining and the way that works. But during my fumblings about, I did actually discover quite a cool trick. And I'm not sure if Apple would approve of it. I mean, let's face it, by now, they're probably busy with other things, let's face it. But it does seem to work. And it does allow you to actually copy 5¼ discs from the Emu, I should say, onto a real 5¼ disc, which is very useful. Now, the reason for that is this can obviously emulate 800K discs, and it's actually in that mode right now. Do you remember earlier I showed you how you could put it into Unidisc mode? Well, it's actually in Unidisc mode at the moment. And I'm going to show you how that works. But it's not that useful, really, because the reality is that for the vast majority of the life of the Apple II range of computers, it was a 5¼ disc machine. Software was released on that. I mean, I have a very large collection of Infocom games, and all of the Apple II games that I have all come on 5¼ disc. If there were a special release, for instance, for the Apple II GS, then that would come out on 3.5" discs, because that machine was obviously of the next generation. Now, obviously, there were 3.5" discs released for the Apple II, the original machine. And those were useful mainly for people in business, because all of a sudden you could go from 140K per disc to 800K per disc. But obviously, if you're gaming and using general utilities from the earlier Apple II era, it's actually much more useful to have 5¼ discs. Now, obviously, you can just run everything from a Floppy Emu. This is only for people who are interested in running original media. And I quite like to do that. I quite like to actually use original floppy disks. As you can see here, I've got some Kodak disks, and a recent purchase, actually, which happened in the time between the last chapter being recorded and now, is I actually managed to get hold of some Parrot disks. Well, actually, I should say the box. Now, Parrot is an interesting story, one for another video. But yeah, I've actually sought that out because that's actually something which is quite nostalgic for me from back in the day. So let's have a look at how we actually do this. We have to open up the boot app. We have to go into options. There comes the options menu. There we go. And we need to go down to the smart port, well, the disk selection options. And this is very important. You can see here we've got a new icon. This is actually the smart port disk. Up here, this actually represents the disk that's actually built into the LC475. Now, what we want to do is we want to use the Floppy Emu to actually boot off. So to do that, we need to put this icon into the boot position, and we can actually put this here as a secondary drive. If we don't do that, we won't be able to access this physical floppy disk, and then we won't be able to copy any data onto it. So we've got to make sure that we do it in that order. So it's going to boot off here, and it's going to use this as a secondary drive. I think it's as it says, slot 5, this is drive 1, drive 2. What I've done right now is I've actually set it up to have an image for MDisk, and that's actually a really cool, interesting desktop user interface for the original Apple II. The only problem with it is the mouse support isn't fantastic, and I don't know if that's to do with this setup here, because it's going through an LC475 and then into an Apple II. Maybe if the mouse support on a real Apple II is better, then it would be quite usable, but I find it very difficult to use on this setup because the mouse is so difficult to use. And I've actually seen another video where the user actually had the same problem, so I think it's maybe particular to this setup, but I will at some point test that out on my, as it were, real Apple II, you know, the one in the big case. So I've got an Apple IIe, so I'll try that there. So anyway, let's continue, let it boot. What you should see is after a few seconds, this will start flashing as it tries to boot off this drive. There we go, it's actually flashing. And it's booting up Apple II desktop. And there we go. So as you can see, a bit of a problem because as the LC475 is faithfully rendering color artifacts, you can see that the way that the Apple II desktop is rendered is actually much more designed for monochrome mode. It basically doesn't work in color mode. So if I go to this menu and open this up, you can see it's basically unreadable. So on here, what we can do is we can hold down Control Apple Escape, and we can go over to monochrome and click that, and then click Continue. And I think it can switch color modes on the fly. There we go. So now you can see it's much better. Don't forget these vertical lines are a fault with this particular LC475, which I need to get around to fixing. I do actually have a full cap kit for it now to recap it. I've also bought caps to recap the Apple II cards as well, just to make sure that the Apple II card is okay. And I'll be doing that in a future video. Along the way, I'm hoping that will fix the video problem. I have a feeling it won't. So if it doesn't, then we'll obviously have to look into that as a separate issue. Anyway, as I said, those vertical lines shouldn't be there, but they're very prominent when you're in monochrome mode. So we won't go into this too much, but it does show you logical devices like you can see MDisk, which is the Floppy Emu. And if I pop this disk in here, it should actually show that on the desktop as well, I think. Give it a second. There we go, blanky. That's a disk that I blanked earlier. We can actually, as I said, boot into various bits of software quite easily by using this system. Now, what we could do is, let me have a look on here. If we've got, yeah, I've got Copy 2 Plus here. Let me click on that. And yeah, it's ready to load up Copy 2 Plus now. So if I do Control Apple and the reset key, so that will reset the machine. Just wait a second and it should boot up off here. And it should boot into Copy 2 Plus. There we go. Right then, now that we've done that, it's actually now possible to copy this disk onto this disk. So I'm going to do that. So let's press C for copy. I'm going to use a disk with format. I believe it formats it, then it actually writes to the disk. So we'll do that. And we're going to go from, well, actually, before we do anything, let's actually make sure which way around the disks are. So was it T and N? There we go. And this is slot 5, drive 1. Okay, so that's slot 1. So let's just press return a couple of times, and let's do that again. I'm going to just check if the other drive is 5.2. Let's check that. I can hear, yeah, so that's 5.2. Okay, that's good. Always good to check before you obviously overwrite data. Yeah. So that's good. So let's go to copy again. We're going to go for this. There we go. So we're going to go, what's the source device? It's, yeah, 5.1. And we're going to write to 5.2. And it says insert the disks. It's now going to read off this disk and it's going to write to that disk. So hopefully when it's finished, we should have a bootable Copy 2 Plus on this 800K disk. It does take a while because it's an 800K disk. So yeah, that's one of the downsides of using, or copying, I should say, 800K disks on an Apple II. It does take a while. Again, formatting takes a while on an 800K disk, and now it's writing. Let's fast forward to this, it takes a while. And there we go. Well, to give you an idea, in real time, that took what felt like about maybe 5 to 7 minutes. Yeah, it took quite a while. So yeah, maybe if you're going to copy 800K disks, then do it as something that you're doing in the background while you're doing some other task. Anyway, let's see if it's worked. So to do that, we need to go back into the menu. And now we need to go down to the slots. We're still in black and white mode, as you can see. So right now we've got this booting first, with this drive being second. So we want to swap those around. So hopefully now it will now boot off the floppy drive, and this will not actually be booted from. So we need to restart the 2E, and let's see if it actually boots off this disk. You could hear it making a noise. And again, there we go, ProDOS, and it should now boot into copy 2+. There we go. So as you can see, it's relatively easy to actually use the Unidisk and to then copy 800K disks onto an 800K disk in the internal drive. What is, as I said, much more difficult is to actually do the same thing except using 5¼ inch images and then copy those onto a real 5¼ inch drive. Let me show you how to do that next. Okay, so for this next section, we have to do a little bit of shenanigans. And the first thing we need to do is we need to lock that we actually have Unidisk set up in this machine. So to do that, we need to go back to the menu. And I'm going to go down here and I'm going to put it into the sort of shape that I want it to be. So let me think. I will want to boot from... I actually have this copy 2 disk here that I already prepared. This was a copy that I did just for this video. So I'm going to boot off this in this section, and then I'm going to try and write to this drive here using the Floppy Emu. So I think what I'll do is I'll keep the smart port here in the second bay, so it won't boot off it. It will actually boot off this disk. So basically what I'm trying to say is this looks actually perfect. So what we need to do is actually quit this menu, and we need to do something. So let's quit here. There we go. So I read the manual for this, and it does say in the manual that if you have any settings for the 2E card, then it will be saved to the 2E prefs file, which is something we talked about earlier. But what it also says is that you can protect that file if you want to keep those settings. So what will happen is if we turn off the machine and plug in this drive, what you will actually find is that you can't actually get the 5¼ inch disk to work. And I'm going to actually try and demonstrate that to you first, I think. I think that's what we'll do. But just so that we don't get stuck, let's go in here where we have the original files. And this particular preference file is different from this one. It's in a subfolder. Same thing with this. This is actually a different version of the actual menu app as well. So if I look at the preferences for this file, you'll see that it's locked. So I'm just going to unlock it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up the menu again. So I'm going to hold on Option. And this is going to write to this prefs file, not the one in the root folder. There we go. So it's in color, this particular machine, normal speed. And if we go down here, it's in the same configuration as you can see. We've got the internal drive as the boot drive, and we've got this as the secondary drive. That's great. So let's just quit. And what we're going to do is we're going to lock that file again, and we're going to use it in a moment. So let's open this back up. Have a look at the prefs for this again. And then we're going to lock it and close it. And let's just open it again, just make sure that it's locked. Yep, it is. Okay, next we need to turn off the machine and get this set up so this is actually plugged in. Let's turn off the machine. So currently we have the Floppy Emu directly plugged into the floppy cable. So I'm going to unplug that. Now I need to plug in the actual drive, the physical drive. There we go. This is quite stiff actually, so I don't need to screw this in. So on the back of this drive, there's a little window and with a cover on it, and I've already popped that off. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to plug this into here as if it was another physical drive. So it just plugs in here. There we are. So hopefully now what we should be able to do is get this to be running in 5¼ inch mode and then be able to write to this drive here. So let's turn on the machine and let it boot up. Okay, here we are, we're ready to go. So I've got my copy 2 plus disk. Let's put that in the internal drive, ready to go. And this is already connected, so we'll put a copy of Oregon Trail that I've made into here. And this is just so that we can see each drive with different images at the same time. And I'm going to change this from Unidisk. So I'm just going into the menu here, going to click on, change the drive, and I want to change it to Apple to 5¼ inch floppy. Let's do that, select that, reboot it. Just wait for a second for it to go and be ready for me to select a disk. There we go, it's ready for me to go. So I'm going to go to 5¼ inch disks, and I'm going to go to games and education. And I'm going to go for Oregon Trail again. And the only reason for that is because I know that it's not a copyrighted disk. It's just a normal DOS disk. In fact, I think it's actually DOS. Is it 3.3? It's the earlier version of DOS. It's not actually ProDOS. So this has got Oregon Trail in. This has got Oregon Trail. This has got copy 2 plus. So let's open up the menu with the Option key. There we go. So we're going to put it back into color mode. And go down here, Smart Port, there we go. So you can see now that because we put it into 5¼ inch mode, the Unidisk icon has disappeared from here. It's not an option anymore. And right now, we don't really know what's going to happen with this disk. We've got actually 2 disks plugged in here, a physical disk, and then we've got a daisy chain with the Floppy Emu. So this is like the secondary disk, basically. And then we've got this as an internal disk. So let's actually boot up. Hopefully then it will boot up off this copy 2 plus, so we can use that then to catalog the disks and see what we have in front of us. So yeah, let's continue. Let it boot up. It's trying to boot off this disk. Oregon Trail. Ah, there we are. So the boot order is, even though this isn't actually shown, it's actually this first and then this disk. So just let's let Oregon Trail complete booting. There we are. We'll take the disk out and then we'll reset the machine. It's trying to boot off there. It can't, obviously, because there's no disk. I've taken it out. It's now gone onto here. There we are, ProDOS, and in a second it should say copy 2 plus. It's booting up. There we go. So we'll pop this in. Now we'll start cataloging the disk. So TN, and we'll go for slot 5 drive 1 first. And wasn't quite sure what that was. It's copy 2 plus, so it must be this drive. It was very quiet, actually. I didn't hear it. But that's slot 5 drive 1 is this drive. Let's press return. We'll do again T for catalog, N for normal. And let's go to slot 6 drive 1. It's the actual physical drive. There we are. Oregon Trail. That's good. Carry on. Yeah. And then TN again, and this time we're going to do 6.2, which hopefully will be this. And you can see Oregon Trail again. Okay, cool. So next what we're going to do is we're going to try and copy this onto a blank disk. So let's see, have I got a blank disk here? Sure, we can find one. Let's have a look at my box here. I will use this blank disk. So let's take this out. We don't want to write over it. What we're going to do is we're going to copy, like I said, 6.1 onto 6.2. Okay, so let's try and do that. Let's pop in the blank disk. So let's catalog again, just make sure, TN and then 6.2. 6.2, okay, is actually the Floppy Emu. So yeah, we want to go from 2 to 1. Yeah, Okay, so C for copy, I think it is. Copy, and we're just going to do disk with format. I think this is how you do it. And then we're going to go from 6.2 to 6.1. Press return, and off it goes. As you can see, it's reading the tracks from the Emu. And in a second, you should write them onto here. Okay, that's not going to work. And the reason for that is this disk hasn't been formatted as a DOS 3.3, so let's do that next. And then we'll come back and we'll try and do this again. So we need to format a disk, so let's do that. We're going to do it as a DOS 3.3, and it's 6.1. We're going to do it to there we go, and it's formatting. And as you can see, it errored on track 1. So this is the problem. If you try and use a 5¼ inch disk at the same time as the Floppy Emu, I have never got it to actually write a disk correctly. So you have to then use the trick that I was showing you to get that to work. So let me show you that next. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the desktop. Okay, so what we're going to do now is instead of booting from this, which will not see this as a smart port disk, we're actually going to boot from this here. And we've locked this, and that has the smart port definition locked in. So even though we can't see the smart port icon right now because we don't have it in smart port mode, it will still actually start up in smart port mode. We've locked that in, and we've used the icon to lock in that preference. So let's do that. So when we do that, as you can see, it's telling you that this actual file is locked and you can't change the preferences. And that's actually what we want. We want it so it's locked in smart port mode. So let's carry on. And it's now going to boot up the Apple II. And hopefully it will boot off this disk 2 drive. It's trying to boot off this one. Can't do that, obviously, because we haven't formatted that with anything in particular. Now it's booting off this one, I think, into copy 2+. Okay, so now let's recatalog the disks just to make sure where we are. So TN, and drive 5.1 is this disk. Okay, carry on. TN again. So 5.2, it's this disk, the physical disk. It can't catalog it because there's nothing in it. That took a while, but eventually returned. So TN. I'm going to look at 6.1. This disk again. But it sounds a little bit more healthy, quite quick this time. Interesting that this is also showing up as 5.2. And it's trying to read a disk that hasn't been formatted. There we are. And then let's do 6.2. And that's the Floppy Emu. And it's showing Oregon Trail. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to copy Oregon Trail from 6.2 to 6.1, and we need to format 6.1 first. So let's do format and DOS 3.3. Select the disk. Now it's going to format it. And you see that this time you can hear the lovely chug of the drive actually formatting the disk, not failing to do it. So yeah, you have to use this cheeky little trick, locking in smart port mode. You do get some oddities with it. As you saw, this drive is turning up as both device 5.2 and, what was it, 6.1 at the same time. But as you can see, it's finished formatting it. If we catalog the drive now, TN 6.1, it's actually pretty quick. Yeah, it's a blank disk basically. So now we're going to do a copy. So copy, and we're going to do just a disk copy. And we're going to go from 6.2 to 6.1, ready to go. It's reading the data of 6.2, which is, as I said, Oregon Trail. So it's now going to read that data. And then in a second, it's going to write it to here, the physical disk. There we are, starting to read the data. And this copy doesn't actually take very long because this has many less tracks than an 800K disk. It's not going to take 5 minutes. It's probably going to take like 1 minute, something like that. Now it's writing the data, nice and chuggy. Asking me, do I want to do it again? I'll say no. And let's just try rebooting the machine. I'm really not sure which the boot order is. I think it'll boot off this first, but it might boot off this. But if it does, we can always eject this disk. Actually, tell you what, let's eject the disk first. Yeah, let's eject this disk. And then we'll restart the 2E. It's trying to boot off the 5¼ inch disk. And as you can see, a perfect copy of Oregon Trail. So yeah, that's the trick. You have to have this plugged in directly into the floppy drive, put it in smart port mode, then inside the preferences, set smart port the way you want it to be. As you saw in this case, I set it as the second drive, and I set the internal drive as being the main drive. Then quit out of the software, lock that preference file so it can't be changed, unplug everything, plug everything back in, but now with the Floppy Emu plugged into the back of your physical drive. And now when you start up the machine, you will not only be able to read from the Floppy Emu, but you will actually be able to write data to the physical disk at the same time. And this is the only way that I've found of actually getting this to work. So yeah, it's an interesting trick. Pretty cool, huh? And finally, in the spirit of Mr. Steve Jobs, we have one more thing. And it is, yep, it's a joystick. And yeah, so why did I get a joystick? Well, I've actually had an Apple II for about pretty much, I think about 4 years now, and I've never actually played any of the action games basically because many of them actually use a joystick and they demand it. And you can play some of them with keys, obviously. But to be fair, one of the really unique things about the Apple II was that it used an analog joystick. And this is a very fine example of it. It's a Mac II, and actually when I bought this, I thought I was buying an Apple II model, and as soon as I ordered it, I then realized that I hadn't, because in fact, it has a PC connector on it, but there was actually an adapter available. And I thought, well, actually it's not such a bad thing because now I can use this with a PC if I want to as well. I do need to get something over that adapter. It does have a couple of pots on it which allow you to adjust the trim on the analog joystick, which is, yeah, it's a unique feature of analog joysticks that they're not just on and off, they have a position. And if you don't get that trim right, you'll get a lot of drift in your games. So anyway, let's plug this in and we'll give Choplifter a go, I think. I've got that set up. So this is why you need the legendary Y cable, not only for disk drives, but also to plug in a joystick. You know, if you want to play any joystick-based games on your Apple IIe inside your LC475, you're going to need one of these. So let's turn it on and let it boot up. And as I said, I've already got Choplifter set up here. I've unplugged this disk drive actually, just to make things a little bit simpler for now. I'm just using this in 5¼ inch mode. I don't have to do any sort of smart port shenanigans. I can just boot up off this and it works perfectly fine. Okay, so we booted up. Let's get my joystick and we'll just start up the 2E. Won't bother going to the menu. I've already got a setup ready to just go straight in and boot off this disk. So just give it a second and it will boot into Choplifter. There we go. Now, this game's actually quite remarkable because as far as I understand it, this is one of the very few games that went from microcomputers to the arcade, not the other way around. I believe that one of the arcade manufacturers saw this game on the Apple II and thought it was so good that they decided to, as I said, make an arcade version of it, which is a pretty high distinction in terms of early computing. Pretty much always, 99.9% of the time, it was in the other direction. Games would be made in the arcade and then they would be ported to micros. So yeah, pretty cool. One of the reasons why it's so good is because it uses an analog joystick, and that means you can make your helicopter move to the left and the right in a more gradual way. Basically, you have different levels of acceleration speed in either direction. Whereas if you think about a Commodore 64, If you push to the left, you're going left. If you push to the right, you're going right. It's a bit more what we would call a twitchy game. So if I press start, so as you can see, you can kind of gently wobble around and you can go down, and you can go down quickly, or you can go up and down quickly and, or more slowly, depending on what you want to do. So this game is basically about rescuing people. So let's go in this direction. How do I change around? Ah, there we are. Press the button. Okay, so let's fly in this direction. We're looking for some people to rescue. Oh, there's a tank. Oh, nearly. There we go. Come on, you can get him. Woohoo! Finally. Ah, there's a guy. Let's drop down. Got him in. Another one. Oh, no. So what do we do with this tank? Very difficult, because he's probably going to smash my people. Here we are. Okay. Oh, I killed one of my guys. And he killed another one. Oh. Ah, there we are. Let's get the light guys in. Oh, he can't get in. So yeah, as you can see, pretty cool, huh? Oh, what's this? It's a full-on house here. There we go. More guys. Oh, and here comes the tank. I'm just going to stay and he's going to kill me. Oh, he didn't get me. Aha. Right then. So yeah, there we go. I'll just leave that go. Very cool. So as you can see, the joystick works as well. The Y port works perfectly well. And yeah, definitely worth getting one of these joysticks. You have to adjust the trims on these to actually get this balance right. Otherwise, the helicopter will, you know, always fly to the left or always fly to the right, up and down, whatever. So yeah, you do need to make sure that you set this correctly. But I've actually done that off camera to get this trimmed really nicely, so it just stays in position. As I said, really cool game. And I'm sure there are many other games on the Apple II that work really well with a joystick as well. So yeah, if you want to do that, you can get an Apple II joystick, plug it into the Y cable, and it does actually work as well. And there we go. What a fantastic piece of equipment, huh? Yeah, this video was very long. There was a lot to pack in. But what I felt was, having made the first video, it made sense to go into how you actually use the card in practice. Especially when it comes to legacy media, you know, things like disk drives. I'm not that familiar with an Apple II, so this video and the process of working out how to use these drives with this machine was a big learning process for myself. I learned about ProDOS and DOS 3.3, and I learned how to make disks. And as we saw earlier, we could see that using Cider Press, we could actually edit those disks, which is a really useful feature, and build our own disks without having to actually do so on an actual physical Apple II. That's useful because obviously an Apple II runs at 8-bit speeds, and we can do disk creation these days on a Windows PC or a Mac, and obviously do it much faster than we could on a machine with a 8-bit horsepower. So that was really interesting. There were so many different aspects to this video that I wanted to go through. The joystick. Then I found that little trick as well with the disk drive, where it allowed me to copy 5 1/4 disk images onto real media. That was an important thing, because this machine actually works as quite a nice bridge between a legacy Apple II and modern hardware. So it's quite interesting that, you know, you can, with the Floppy Emu, bring in any disk image basically, and then copy that onto physical media. Not always easy, to be honest, because you have the same limitations with disks as you did back in the day. Some of them are copy protected, and you have to use nibbling software to you know, bit copy basically the data from the original disk or the disk image onto the physical media. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on there. Anyway, this video has gone on long enough, and I think we should wrap it up. All I will say is that if you haven't been here before and you enjoyed this video and you haven't subscribed, then please subscribe. Hit the subscribe button, and make sure you hit the notification button as well. So hopefully you get notified about new videos as we release them. And if you enjoyed this video, please click on the like button. Give the like button a bit of a stab there. Prod it, whatever you want to do with it, poke it. Just please press the like button, because if you like this video, it then gets recommended to more people. and it will become a popular video that will be useful to other people in the future. Anyway, hopefully you can do that. If you're already subscribed, welcome back again. And until next time, take care. Ta-ra.